Hello, hi, and welcome to this episode of the Mandy Meyer podcast. As per usual, you know what this podcast is about. This podcast is about your health and fat loss expedition or any expedition that you're on. Because as you would know by now, this is a podcast where we chat. Of course, the focus and the topics are mostly about health and fat loss. But a lot of the times with health and fat loss and the change of lifestyle to a healthier lifestyle comes a change of mindset. And when we touch on mindset topics, a lot of the times those mindset topics, those very specific mindset topics can help you in all areas of whatever you're working on. But today's episode is specifically about weight loss and what a sustainable amount of weight loss per week would be. I don't necessarily like chatting about, oh, you got to lose X amount of weight per week, because as you know by now, it is very much for me about being health focused, about creating a healthier lifestyle through creating healthier habits. And in the process of doing that, weight loss or fat loss then becomes a byproduct. But I know that it is also nice to know, to more or less have an idea of what you should be looking at for a sustainable amount of weight loss. So I'm going to chat about that in this episode. And then I'm also going to try and bring in diet breaks into this episode. So when to actually step away from being within a calorie deficit, when to give it a little bit of a break, and when to maybe just push yourself into maintenance, and what the benefits of that can be at any given stage. So on that note, let's get into today's episode of this podcast. Firstly, what is a sustainable amount of weight to lose per week? And when I say sustainable, I mean amount that you lose that you can maintain for the rest of your life. Remember, a successful diet, quote unquote, for the lack of better words, is not necessarily about the amount of weight that you can lose in the shortest period of time, but it's about the amount of weight that you can lose and maintain for the rest of your life. Many people say, oh, I successfully lost 20 kilograms when I was doing keto, but then I gained another 20 back plus another 10. And I'm like, well, then it wasn't successful. Because for me, successful is losing that weight and then keeping that weight off for a long period of time, right? Therefore, it has to be done in a sustainable manner. And when I say sustainable, the question that you always need to ask yourself is, can I do this for the rest of my life? If the answer is no, then guess what? It is not sustainable. So if we go back to what is a sustainable amount of weight to lose per week, on paper, I would say around 500 grams. Now remember, that is on paper. That's not necessarily in real life, because we know in real life it can be very different. Maybe 1 week you might lose 1 kilogram. Maybe the next week you might gain 100 grams. Maybe the week thereafter you might gain another 200 grams. And then maybe the week thereafter you might lose 800 grams. But if you look at it on average over a long period of time, we would say more or less around 500 gram loss per week is what a sustainable amount would be. Now, in saying that, there are some considerations or things that you need to keep in mind or consider when we are looking at sustainable weight loss per week. Someone that doesn't have a huge amount of body fat to lose, I would say 500 grams is sustainable, because your calories are going to have to be a sustainable amount of calories, right? So you're not going to fully restrict the amount of calories, because you're really not going to have a huge amount of calories to play around with. Now, whereas someone that might have a lot of body fat to lose, they might have a lot of wiggle room within their calories. And what I mean by that is someone that's got a lot more body fat to lose needs or requires a lot more energy throughout the day. So needs and requires a lot more calories throughout the day. So if your calorie deficit amount is around 2,000 or 2,200 or 2,300, and that sees you being in a deficit, you can cut your calories to a more aggressive amount if you want to, and still have it be sustainable, because you're not doing something silly like cutting it to below 1,000 calories or 1,200 calories or whatever it is. So if that is the case and you have a lot of weight or a lot of body fat to lose, then maybe you might be losing more than 500 grams per week, especially in the initial stages of your fat loss expedition. So for example, let's take someone like myself. Because I don't have a huge amount of body fat to lose, I might even look at a sustainable amount. If I wanted to cut, say, 2 or 3 kilograms, I would look at a sustainable amount of maybe around even 200 grams per week, because my calorie deficit goal is not going to be super high like someone who has got a lot of body fat to lose, right? That's why I always say, in general, on paper, it's just a general blanket sort of guideline. You would say around 500 grams loss per week, that would be a sustainable loss. But like I said, if you've got a lot more body fat to lose, you can push it for a little bit more because your calories are higher, so there's more wiggle room within the calories, so you're still eating a fair amount, right? So it is sustainable. But if you've got a very little amount of body fat to lose, you don't have a lot of wiggle room within your calories. So that means if you want to lose weight fast, you're going to have to totally cut those calories, and that is where it becomes very unsustainable. And like I said, you always need to be asking yourself, can I do this for the rest of my life, right? So regardless how much body fat you have got to lose, if you are tackling it in a way that sees you being fully restrictive, totally cutting calories, you're hungry all the time, you're miserable all the time, you say no to all your social events, but you're losing weight left, right, and center, you really need to question your approach as to how you're doing it, because you might be losing weight fast now, but you're stopping the rest of your life to do that. Okay, and that is not necessarily very sustainable. So again, only you would know if what you are doing is sustainable for you or not sustainable for you. Okay, now if we have a look at diet breaks, a lot of people ask me, how long did it take me to lose my 40 kilograms? And a lot of people expect me to give them an answer of saying, oh, it took me a straight 2 years. For 2 years, I was in a calorie deficit, and that's how long it took me to lose 40 kilograms. Incorrect, right? It took me 4 years. And I've done a full episode on this. You can scroll through. I might even link it in the show notes. I probably will do that for you just to make it a little bit easier, where I explain exactly how long it took me to lose 40 kilograms. But there were certain phases and stages within my 40 kilogram loss that I actually went out of a calorie deficit and I went into a maintenance amount, or I went into a little bit of a surplus amount. There were times where I did take diet breaks, and instead of being fully focused on a calorie deficit, there was maybe a stage or a phase where I was focused on running my first half marathon or my first marathon, for example, right? And you always need to have a look at it and be like it. You need to ask yourself the question, are you fatigued? Do you have any diet fatigue? Do you want to focus on any other goals that are not necessarily fat loss? Okay. And you need to be able to make that decision and say to yourself, yes, I am feeling a little bit of fatigue of being within a diet the entire time or within a calorie deficit. So maybe then take yourself out of a calorie deficit, put yourself in a maintenance amount. You decide on the time frame. Remember, this is the rest of your life. So if you decide you want to maintain whilst you're on holiday, fantastic. Push yourself into a maintenance amount, or don't even log. Give yourself a break. And then when you come back from holiday, go back into a deficit amount, for example. Or if you just decide, I've been in a calorie deficit for 6 months, I'm tired, I'm fatigued, I'm exhausted now, take yourself out of a deficit, put yourself into maintenance, and then eat in maintenance amount of calories. Or like I said, if you go on holiday or you go away for a weekend, one thing I want to be very specific about is you don't need to be in a calorie deficit for the entire time until you get to your goal weight, quote unquote. If you want to go into maintenance when you go on holiday to Italy or Greece, push yourself into maintenance, right? Take a diet break. If you want to focus on running your first 10 kilometer or your first 21 kilometer instead of being fully focused on being in a calorie deficit and your goal being fat loss. Focus on a performance-based goal instead as well. And many times, more often than not, sometimes we do need just a little bit of a break away from a calorie deficit, away from constantly pushing for fat loss as a goal, away from constantly thinking about what foods are best for fat loss. Sometimes we just need to take a step away and focus on other things, add other things, other areas of enjoyment, but then also set a time frame of where you take in this break, and then set a start date as to when you will start going back into a calorie deficit. Your diet break, for me, a lot of the times, or coming out of a calorie deficit, a lot of the times it helps more from a mental perspective, right? Because you can be so fatigued from constantly thinking about what to eat, when to eat, how to log the foods, and also the fatigue around that number on the scale and constantly fighting that number on the scale. And oftentimes taking a step away from that for a week or for 2 weeks and focusing maybe on, like I said, performance-based goals, or just focusing on enjoyment, for example, or your holiday. A lot of the times that can just sort of boost your mental energy again. And then that can give you a second breath to go back into, say, a second diet phase or a second phase of being within a calorie deficit. And oftentimes that is the thing that just sparks that oomph again and sparks that power of momentum, right? So don't ever be scared to take a bit of a break from your diet or from being in a calorie deficit. Don't ever think that you need to push and lose 20 kilograms all at once or 30 kilograms all at once. Break it up into different phases, dependent how you're feeling at certain phases and stages of your health and fat loss expedition. On that note, I'm going to love and leave you like I usually do. Keep smiling, keep laughing, and keep being kind to one another. Much love, your friend who took several different diet breaks during her 40 kilogram fat loss, Mandy.